The night of the Clarence House Gala was supposed to be a celebration, a shimmering display of royal unity under the glitter of chandeliers. But beneath the velvet gowns and champagne toasts, something darker was brewing. Prince William, now stepping deeper into the spotlight as his father's health visibly declined, had begun to feel a strange shift in the air. It wasn't just the usual pressure of succession, it was something colder, more calculated, like a game being played behind his back. Across the hall, a figure once disgraced lingered in the shadows: Prince Andrew. Once a proud duke, now a walking headline of past shame. His posture was stiff, eyes heavy with resentment, as if still clinging to the last threads of relevance. But he wasn't just lurking, he was waiting and watching. At the heart of this quiet tension stood Queen Camilla, regal as ever, her movements graceful, her words soft, but her mind razor sharp. Camilla had survived too much to allow herself to fade gently into the background. As Charles's condition worsened and William stepped forward, she saw her influence slipping, and she wasn't about to let that happen. That's when she saw it, her opportunity. Andrew! He was damaged, yes. Publicly ridiculed, cast out after the Epstein scandal, left with no real power, but precisely because of that, he was dangerous. Wounded pride made for sharp weapons. Camilla didn't need him to win anything, she just needed him to cause trouble, to stir the waters, to press against William hard enough that the young heir might stumble. So a plan began to take shape. It was subtle, almost elegant. A confidential draft, allegedly from William's office, appeared in Andrew's hands. It outlined a final cut. No more privileges, no more access, no more dignity, the kind of thing that would crush a man already hanging by a thread. Andrew, true to form, snapped. He lashed out. Not in private, not with dignity, no, he went public. A rare interview, a carefully crafted jab, a pitiful plea disguised as a noble grievance. "I have always served the realm," he said, every word loaded. "But it seems my service is no longer of value." The press, hungry for anything royal and ugly, devoured it. "Prince Andrew betrayed by his own," screamed one cover. "Is William too ruthless?" asked another. And just like that, the public was split. Some rolled their eyes, unwilling to forget Andrew's past sins, but others, they started wondering, was the future king really that cold? Could it be that William, in his eagerness to lead, was showing the same unforgiving edge that had once defined other fallen monarchs? Camilla, meanwhile, remained distant. She hadn't said a word, not publicly, not directly. Instead, she simply appeared at palace teas, charity events, quiet gatherings, slipping in vague sentiments. "It's a pity, truly," she'd say, stirring her tea with a porcelain spoon. "Family should never turn on its own, especially not in times like these." The effect was powerful. She began to look like the only adult in the room, the voice of reason, a queen trying to keep the family from tearing itself apart. And William, he saw it all. The media twisting, the public hesitating, the quiet gaslighting, but he had no proof. Not yet. Every move he made was watched, every word scrutinized. To confront Camilla openly would look like paranoia. To attack Andrew would seem heartless. He was boxed in, and Camilla knew it. But what she didn't know was that someone else had started paying attention. Someone with a long memory and a grudge of his own. Someone ready to uncover the hand behind the draft and blow the entire game wide open. Sir Edmund had once walked the palace corridors as one of King Charles's most trusted advisors. Sharp, principled, and notoriously meticulous, he was never the type to bow to politics. Years ago, a heated confrontation with Prince Andrew had ended his tenure abruptly. Andrew, in his arrogance, had humiliated him publicly, but Edmund hadn't forgotten. And when the gossip around the forged draft began to swirl, he sensed something familiar in its stench. He began digging, not through official documents, those were too clean, but through whispers, discarded notes, carelessly forwarded emails, even old connections among Camilla's former staff. He moved like a man who'd been waiting for this moment, quietly stitching together a tapestry tapestry of evidence no one expected him to notice. But once it started coming together, the picture was crystal clear. Camilla hadn't just exploited Andrew, she had orchestrated the entire narrative. The draft? Fake. Delivered to Andrew by a courier loyal to one of Camilla's inner circle. The newspaper that ran the leak recently contacted by a PR consultant known to have worked closely with her. The photos of Andrew at charities, the quotes that painted William as cold, all pushed with eerie precision by a network that quietly answered to the Queen. When Edmund presented the evidence to William, he said nothing at first. The young prince simply stared at the pages, his jaw tightening. This wasn't just court gossip, this was betrayal, deep, personal, and public. But he also knew what had to be done. The monarchy couldn't survive another whisper campaign. The truth had to come out. William authorized a quiet but strategic leak. Not to every outlet, just the right ones, trusted journalists with sharp pens and a nose for drama. By morning, the headlines had flipped. Queen Camilla's secret plot to undermine Prince William, forged documents, staged appearances, the real puppet master behind the throne. Camilla's silence was no longer an elegant strategy. She looked guilty. Her usual poise seemed forced. At a public event, when asked by a journalist about the documents, she responded with a smooth but hollow phrase, "I have always acted in the crown's best interest." But her eyes told another story. Tight, cornered, uncertain. Andrew, meanwhile, was spiraling. The realization that he'd been a pawn hit him hard. The sympathy he'd craved turned to ridicule. "Royal clown," shouted one tabloid, "played by the Queen herself," another joked, placing his photo beside a puppet on strings. He canceled his next few public appearances, retreating into the same cold chamber where this all began, now more isolated than ever. William didn't gloat. He simply pressed forward, appearing in hospitals, shaking hands, giving speeches that reminded people what true leadership looked like. At a major charity event, he delivered a single line that landed like thunder across the kingdom. "We serve the people best when we are honest with them and with ourselves." It wasn't just a speech, it was a reckoning. In the palace, eyes began shifting. Advisors who once leaned toward Camilla started backing away. The same society women who whispered her praises now avoided her name. And in the quiet corridors of Clarence House, where paintings of old kings stared down with eternal judgment, Queen Camilla stood alone, still regal, still powerful, but for the first time in years, without control. She had played her moves with precision, but in underestimating the people around her, she'd forgotten one truth. Every player in the game of power eventually leaves a trail, and the palace, as always, remembers everything. The palace had returned to stillness, but it wasn't peace. It was the silence of something broken, something cracked too deep to fully mend. Queen Camilla, once the quiet force behind every delicate maneuver, now moved through the halls like a ghost wearing pearls. Her words, once revered, now echoed into emptiness. Courtiers smiled politely but kept their distance. No one dared speak of the documents directly, but everyone knew. The crown may still sit on her head, but the power had slipped through her fingers. She tried to reclaim the narrative. A carefully arranged interview, a soft-lit backdrop, a tone of regret, not guilt. "I have made mistakes," she said, "but only ever in service of this family." But it didn't land. It wasn't what people needed. The performance felt like just that, a performance. The woman once praised as the stabilizing force in a fractured monarchy now stood accused of being the very source of the fracture. Andrew had vanished from public view entirely. Behind the stone walls of the estate he now occupied, his days were silent. No interviews, no charity appearances, no strategy. He had tasted attention again, briefly, and it had turned to ash in his mouth. His final humiliation wasn't the scandal itself, it was realizing he had never been the main player. Not even in his own downfall. One morning, a lone photograph surfaced. Andrew at a window, hair unkempt, shoulders slouched, face pale and distant. The caption was merciless. "Once a prince, now just a pawn." The tabloids had turned fully, feeding on the very narrative Camilla once encouraged. But not everyone collapsed. Prince William, steady in posture and purpose, emerged from the storm more resolute than ever. His public appearances carried a new gravity. At a veterans memorial, he bowed his head with quiet strength. At a children's hospital, he sat at tiny tables and listened like every story mattered. And at a speech in front of the Royal Foundation, he finally said it plainly. Loyalty is not about silence, it is about truth, and truth must never be feared. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't theatrical, but it was exactly what the public needed, a leader who understood the weight of the crown without trying to manipulate it. And slowly, approval began to return. Not the breathless celebrity adoration, but something older, respect. Inside the palace, changes began to ripple quietly. Certain advisors were dismissed, staff reassignments came swiftly, the Queen's presence at official meetings became infrequent. Charles, though silent and weakened, was said to have been saddened by the events, but even he could not undo what had been exposed. Camilla, for all her cunning, never lost the title. She remained queen, but she was no longer central, no longer the quiet force behind the scenes. She was a fixture, elegant, composed, but politically sidelined. Her influence, once vast and subtle, had narrowed to ceremony alone. The final image was one of poetic symmetry. At dusk, William stood at the palace balcony, watching the golden glow fade over the gardens. A storm had passed, but the clouds still lingered. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just watched. Below, people gathered, quiet but present. Some waved. Most just looked up, acknowledging him, not as a symbol, but as a man who had held steady when the walls trembled. Behind him, the echo of footsteps faded down the corridor. Camilla's figure disappeared into shadow. Andrew's name hadn't been uttered in days. The game was over. The board cleared, but the lesson remained. In the royal house, power doesn't shout. It whispers, and the ones who survive aren't the loudest. They're the ones who know when to listen and when to strike.